Well, let me welcome you all here. In a few moments, it's going to be my privilege to introduce Susan Blackmore. But first, I want to thank you for your patience and for Dana's timely intervention. Thanks, Dana, for that, and Ben and Seth for their technical work, and Rick for the use of the theater for this wonderful evening. Before I introduce Sue Blackmore, I would like to read you a little something. It's called True or False, number 5, and it's from 9 short texts. There are between 5,000 and 6,000 different languages spoken in the world today. True or false? The human species has more scent-producing glands than any other primate. True or false? Infants have little ability to think symbolically or conceptually until they acquire language. True or false? Humans have a comparatively long childhood and a short adolescence, so that children can learn the complex social and moral lessons before the onset of parent-child competition. True or false? Significant social and cultural change is currently measured in decades rather than centuries or half-centuries. True or false? Agricultural field systems first appeared in New Guinea, near Australia, over 10,000 years ago. True or false? Like genes, languages evolve because they accumulate mutations. True or false? On a sunny day, the temperature near the ground surface can be as much as 20 degrees hotter than only a couple of feet away from the Earth. True or false? In America and British middle-class society, about 1 birth in 20 reveals a false paternity. True or false? In 1976, the eminent biologist Richard Dawkins wrote a book entitled The Selfish Gene, in which he introduced the idea of a meme. The word meme is related to memory and is meant to sound like gene. A meme is a kind of replicator that transmits ideas from person to person across human culture, similar to genes that transmit biological traits from cell to cell. If an idea, song, or latest fad catches on, a meme is said to propagate from one brain to another in a sequel of imitation. Susan Blackmore, in her popular and insightful book, The Meme Machine, has fully explored the phenomenon of the meme, confronting the deepest questions from why humans have language to altruism, sex, and the internet. In addition, she makes a compelling case for the theory that even our conscious self and our sense of free will are illusions, created by memes for the sake of their own replication. Susan Blackmore is a reader in psychology at the University of the West of England, Bristol, where she lectures on the psychology of consciousness. Her research interests include evolutionary psychology and the theory of memetics, among others. She writes for several magazines, has an occasional column in the Independent newspaper, and is a frequent contributor on radio and television. It is a pleasure to welcome Susan Blackmore to Massachusetts College of Art.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want you to imagine that you are a work of art. I don't mind what it is. It can be a painting, an installation, a song, anything you like, right? Now, if you are a work of art, your only hope of survival is to get somebody to copy you. Otherwise, you're just going to sit there and nothing will happen. Who might it be? Well, the teenagers are quite important these days. Look at this teenager's room. You probably can't see that very well. Can you see? It looks awfully blurry to me. You know, what's happening in here? This lad has chosen South Park and the Forbidden Planet and the Map of the World and Van Gogh and Monet and some really bizarre screensaver on there and all of these things. Now, these have all been copied. He got them from shops, a lot of them. Some of them he cut out of magazines. Some of them he made himself with the technology in that computer there. But in all of these different ways, he has copied the works of art. They are using him to get propagated. That is what it means to take the meme's eye view. To imagine that you are the memes. And that is what I want you to do tonight. So, I'm going to explain the theory of memetics and use it to talk about how we humans came to be the peculiar creatures we are, and say something about where I think it's going in the future. Now, the beginning, as John said, was with the selfish gene. So let's start at the beginning. How many of you have read The Selfish Gene? Oh, quite a few. Good. Well, that's quite an effective meme then. I think it looks like about a fifth of you or so have read it. If it ever takes any of the rest of you the idea that you want to learn some evolutionary biology, that book, even though it is 1976, 25 years old, is a fantastic book and still worth reading. And it's way, way up in Amazon. I mean, it makes me jealous as an author that a book 26 years old can be, you know, way up there in the hundreds. It's incredible. But it's because it's a very good book. Anyway, let's start at the beginning. What's a meme? Who's heard the one about the poodle in the microwave? Nobody? Hands up, properly up, so I can see. Good, about a third of you. Well, you see, the poodle in the microwave is a very effective meme. And memes, oh, sorry, the rest of you don't know about the poodle in the microwave, do you? The story goes like this. Once upon a time, there was an American woman who had a very beautiful poodle. And every week she took it for a walk and brought it home and gave it a bath and dried it in the oven. Well, one day she went out and bought one of those newfangled microwave ovens. And as usual, she washed the poodle and put it into the oven to dry. But it died an agonizing death. Whereupon she sued the manufacturer for $1 million for not putting on a sign saying, "Do not dry this poodle in the do not dry your poodle in this microwave." Is that story you heard? Yes, no?
More or less.
Well, I want to hear if it's less.
I heard that it exploded.
Oh, you got the exploding poodle version. Who's had the exploding poodle? Oh, most of you. In different parts of the world, different versions win out. What else has anybody had?
I heard it was a cat.
You've had the cat in the microwave. That's much, much less common than various dogs. Poodle is way ahead. Some other dogs, dachshunds and chihuahuas get in occasionally. But there's also the cat. Any other versions? Yes?
Hamster.
You had the hamster. That's quite rare. I've only come across the hamster. Are you serious? You really heard the hamster version? Yeah. Anything else? No? I have heard a tortoise version, and it doesn't seem to me to work with a tortoise. I mean, you don't wash tortoises and take them for walks, do you? But I would expect most of you to say that what you heard was not my European anti-American version. Which is basically poking fun at Americans for always suing everyone and, you know, not allowed to have hot cups of coffee because you spill them on your lap and, you know, for God's sake, if you don't know that cups of coffee shouldn't be spilt, well, you know. So, you know, I sort of think you ought to have you ought to be an English woman and you ought to have an equivalent joke. But anyway, the principle is this is a very effective meme. It is spread all over the world. I haven't been all over the world, but all the countries I've been to, I've never been to one that hasn't heard this story. Now, that is a meme. It is information that is copied from person to person. So, let me get more specific about this. In The Selfish Gene, what Richard Dawkins was trying to do was to explain the principles of universal Darwinism. And he applied it mostly to genes. Now, the principles of universal Darwinism start from Darwin's incredible idea. Darwin's idea of evolution by natural selection. Some people say, I've heard it said that this is the best idea anybody ever had. Can you imagine there being such a thing as the best idea anybody ever had? Isn't that a wonderful thought? Anyway, I agree that that is true. If the prize goes to anyone for the best idea anyone ever had, I would give it to Darwin. Now, you probably think you know how natural selection works, but I want you to really get your heads around natural selection really well. Because nothing that I say in the rest of this, however long I'm going to rabbit on for, will make any sense unless you really understand it. What Darwin said was something like this. I'm paraphrasing from The Origin of Species, 1859. If you have a whole lot of creatures that vary, which cannot be doubted, I've been to the Galapagos Islands and I've measured the finches and the blah, 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 and if there is a struggle for life, such that nearly all of the creatures die, which cannot be doubted, I've read Malthus and population explosions and I've measured how quickly elephants reproduce, blah, 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 blah. And if the very few survivors pass on whatever it was that helped them survive to the next generation, then the next generation must be better adapted to their environment than their parents were. Right? The structure is if, then. Let me make it really clear. Here we have some creatures that vary. I've got two nice tigers and something asleep, and a brown teddy, and a blue teddy, and a pink. Any guesses? I don't know. And 3 koalas, an elephant, and a rabbit eating a carrot. Right? Now, here they all are getting on happily with their lives when suddenly, along comes a ferocious predator. Well, most of them have been eaten. Some have fallen off a cliff and died. I think the rabbit survived, goodness knows how, because it was so busy eating a carrot, and the pink thing has survived, and this thing that was asleep. Now, why? Well, maybe this was so curled up in a nice corner that the ferocious predator didn't see it. And I don't know, maybe this was well camouflaged. It doesn't matter. Why? The fact is, when the predator came along, this is what happened. All those genes that created the copies that created those creatures have gone. Now, what happens? Well, this one has, if it wakes up, will have babies, and they will be similar, and the whole process will happen again, and again, and again. Now, do you see what's going to happen? Every time you copy, you get an expansion of different new things. You copy with variations. You copy from this, make a whole lot of rabbits, some with longer ears, shorter, bigger carrots, I mean, whatever. Doesn't work, does it? But you can see how that iterative process will produce, inevitably, design out of nowhere. Now, Darwin wouldn't have put it this way, but the American philosopher Dan Dennett calls it the evolutionary algorithm. An algorithm is a mindless procedure that must produce a given output when you run it. And you can see exactly that it's this structure. If, then. If you have variation, selection, and heredity, then you must get evolution. I want to emphasize 2 things about this process, which is what makes it so beautiful, which is what makes it Darwin's dangerous idea, as Dan Dennett calls it. First, it must happen. There's no question about it. It's not even like kind of Newtonian physics or something, which you can ask, well, why is there gravity? I hope you can see that that simple mindless procedure must happen. Secondly, there's no designer. As Dan puts it, you get design out of chaos without the aid of mind. Note that this ferocious predator here, this poodle, is not a designer. It's just hungry. You know, he was just bumbling along wanting some food and just happened to eat whatever was, it was able to eat. But the effect of this was to produce design out of nowhere. That's what makes natural selection so powerful in biology. But the point that Dawkins was making in The Selfish Gene was this. It is an algorithm that is substrate neutral. It doesn't just have to work on genes. It will work whenever you have variation, selection, and heredity. In exactly the same inevitable way, and in exactly the same way without a designer. And so, to illustrate this point, he said, look around you in the primeval soup of culture. Everywhere you look are things being copied from person to person. They're copied with variation and selection. Right? So you have exactly this algorithm running. Let's think again about the poodle in the microwave, and you can see exactly that. You saw all the variations. We've got the standard poodle, we've got the American version where they sue the manufacturers, we've got the exploding poodle, we've got much rarer the cat and even the hamster. The poodle wins again and again, God knows why, but you see it's just like the ferocious predator. We don't need to know why. All we need to know is that all of you have heard hundreds and thousands of stories in your life. And for some amazing reason, some of you must have passed on the poodle, and it hangs out there, and all our minds get infected with it. So that is the basic principle of memes. Now, when you look around you, you can see all kinds of things that are mimetic. These chairs, for goodness sake, I mean, you may not think of these chairs as a great work of art or a great mimetic design, but somebody has copied them. A factory makes them, and somebody actually chose them to put in this lecture theatre with their delightful orangey colour, and the same with the carpet, and the same with, these are all memes that have survived. The building, the way we build buildings, the lights, the whole idea of giving a lecture and standing up in front of people and crossing around and saying things, all of these are memes because they are copied from person to person. Look at your clothes. You didn't invent the idea of tying this nattily around your waist like this, and you didn't invent the idea of wearing your jacket open and having something hanging around there. You probably saw it from somebody else, and you copied it, and you went to the shop and bought them, the things, and you put them together. And that guy I saw with, jeans that don't quite stay up, this must be a kind of thing that one copies. It's a meme that spreads around and is successful in a certain number of people. In order to understand memetics, you have to be quite clear about what's a meme and what's not. Because there is a danger, well, there are many, many dangers, but one of the dangers is that you think of everything as a meme, and then you're lost. I mean, in any scientific theory, I had a brilliant theory once that explained everything. It was a sort of psychic field theory that explained everything, and I suddenly realised that if you can explain everything, you explain nothing. So if everything's a meme, it's hopeless. So you need to stick to the definition. This is the Oxford Dictionary definition, which it was entered the dictionary in 1998. And it says meme, biological, shortened from mimeme, which is the Greek for that which is imitated. In fact, what Richard Dawkins said was, I want a word to describe the new replicator. This is the information that is copied in this process. It's called the replicator. And I want it to, as John said, mimeme comes from a suitable Greek root. It means that which is imitated. But I wanted a nice catchy meme, basically, he was saying. I wanted to sound like Jean and be a monosyllable. So he shortened it to meme. An element of the culture that may be considered to be passed on by non-genetic means, especially imitation. To keep it simple, I would really say it's that which is imitated. That's the basic thing. So if you think is something a meme or not, think, well, has it been imitated? And I'm using the word imitation here very, very broadly. You could say copied if you prefer. Has it been copied? So ask yourself, if you have some idea or you do some behaviour or something, and you think, is that a meme? Think, well, did I copy that from somebody else? If you did, it's a meme. All right? So can you think of things that you know or that you do that are not memes? Pardon?
Like your hair growing?
Your hair growing, yes. I mean, you didn't copy that from anybody else. The way you cut your hair, of course, is a meme, and the way you style it and all that sort of stuff. But the actual fact of it growing, yeah, what else?
Sexual appetite.
Sexual appetite, absolutely. That's there from the genes. They give that to you. You're going to have it whether you like it or not. Yes, go on. What else? What about things you might have learned?
Walking.
Walking, yes. Walking is innate in the sense that it'll happen in any member of our species, even if they were, brought up by lions or something, or didn't ever see a person. They learned to walk, but they just learned in the sense that as an infant, you stagger about an awful lot and fall over a lot before you. So it's learned, but it's not copied. Go on. What else along those lines? Pardon?
Bike riding?
Yes, absolutely. The bike is a meme, and the whole idea of riding a bike is a meme. That's copied from person to person. But you're absolutely right. That skill of balancing, you can only learn yourself. And if you try and copy someone else, it doesn't work, because what you have to do is get the feel of the balance. So all of those things, skiing, surfboarding, all these kind of things. At the clutch control, oh, well, you don't have clutches on the whole, do you? But some of you do, proper drivers. Clutch control. You can't learn by copying, and you always in the beginning. So not everything you know is a meme. And if you imagine your favourite view of the mountains or your favourite view of the river or whatever, that's not a meme. That's something you saw and you remembered. So there's an awful lot of mental stuff going on in your head that's not mimetic. The mimetic stuff is all the stuff that was copied. If you've got that clear, and when you get into arguments with people who say things like, ooh, memes, and they think they're these kind of spooky things that float about in the ether and kind of, they're not. They're the stuff that's copied. And you can sound superior and correct. Now, with any replicator, with any evolving system, the question becomes which ones are going to survive and which are not. Now, this picture somebody drew for a magazine article of mine, and it shows the memes climbing up, struggling to get into the brains. And she drew this because I have a sort of favourite saying to imagine a world full of brains and far more memes than can find homes. Then you ask which memes are going to find homes in people's brains and get passed on. So take this room here, this is a world full of brains, and there's an awful lot of memes coming out of this mouth here. And if you get bored and you start reading your book instead, then there's other memes going in there. Which of these are going to survive? That's the way to think about the mimetic competition which is designing our world. Notice the memes are selfish, just like selfish genes. And they are selfish in exactly the same way. And this is another thing that you can feel superior about when you understand it, because it's very often misunderstood. And this is part of the antagonism to selfish gene theory, is through people just not understanding what the word selfish means. Selfish genes are not selfish by virtue of sitting there in your body going, oh, I want to get copied, they can't. They're the order of bases on a bit of DNA. And, a bit of DNA can't be selfish in the sense of having desires. That's stupid. Nor can a meme like, that thing you've got hung around your neck. That is not sitting there saying, copy me. But it is effectively selfish in this sense, that it will get copied if it can, and it doesn't care about the consequences. In the case of genes will get copied if they can, and it doesn't care. They don't care whether they make you ill or anything else. If they can get copied, they will, and they spread and have consequences. With memes, the same thing. They will spread, and they do not care whether they make you happy or unhappy, whether they affect your genes, your body, your life. They don't care because they can't care, because they're just information that's copied. So that's the sense in which they're selfish, rather than climbing up here with intentions.
Like smoking.
Like smoking, absolutely. Smoking is an absolutely classic example of a dangerous meme. It is dangerous to genes because of its effects on health, and it's dangerous to other memes because it restricts your life, and it's dangerous to your whole life. But of course, it spreads for various reasons. They are biological as well as mimetic, but it's a good phenomenon. Now, you need to get in mind a general principle. That memes will get copied if they can, and they'll use any strategy they can. Some memes get copied because they're good or true or beautiful or useful, whereas others get copied even though they're not. So if you think of some of the grand memeplexes, the word memeplex is shortened from co-adapted meme complex, which means nothing more clever than a group of memes that hang out together. You have the same in biology with co-adapted gene complexes. So, the whole of science is a vast memeplex, right? All the ideas of science kind of hang out together. You've got to learn an awful lot of them before you can understand more, and they get passed on in the same journals and so on. It's a vast, great memeplex. Now, by and large, science has mechanisms for making sure that the memes are true. That's the whole point of science. It doesn't always succeed, but at least it tries. You've got political systems and financial systems and all kinds of beliefs of various kinds. All of these, and all the arts and theatre and all these things are all memeplexes. Some of them we're selecting because really they are good or true or beautiful or useful. Others are not. Now, I want to think a little bit about the ones that are not, because they're particularly interesting. They're the ones that use meme tricks. Who's had this one? Quick, danger, just heard from IBM, quick, a terrible virus is going to be passed around. Tell your friends immediately. This virus will destroy everything on your hard disk. Quick, tell your friends and save them from a fate worse than death. Or words to that effect. There are lots and lots of versions. This is a very old one. This is about 6 or 7 years old. It's still going, and it still says, from IBM this morning. Now, who's had that one? Hands up. Or something like it. Hands down. Who hasn't ever had such a thing? Is that because you don't have any email? Or you've been lucky? Fine, that's what I wondered. I said, I'm not used to audiences where there's anyone who doesn't use a computer, but I mean, that's a perfectly legitimate reason. You are safe from infection by these kind of meme places. Now, this one has been going around for a very long time. Why? I mean, it's a successful meme, it keeps on getting copied. Why?
People feel like they're doing a beneficial thing to pass it on to other
Absolutely. That's what I call the altruism trick. I mean, you know, you have genuine altruism maybe, but basically it's a trick of the memes to make you want to help your friends. Go on, what else? So that's one thing.
It's frightening.
It's frightening, it plays on the fear. Yep, what else?
It's easily copied.
It's very easily copied. We now have the machinery that all you have to do is press send to all or something like that and off it goes. Contrast that with chain letters. Are any of you old enough to have had chain letters when you were a kid? Yes, some of you. And that was really laborious. I mean, I remember these ones that had a list of 6 addresses and you had to copy them all out and put your own at the bottom and your best friend at the top, or I don't know, whatever you had to do, and then send them off in 6 envelopes and send them all stamps or postcards or something or another. You know, that was laborious and they got around. This is very easy. Just press, you know, send to all your friends. Okay, what else?
It's difficult to delete it.
I don't think it's difficult to delete it. You can just press delete, can't you?
You can't do it before the fact.
Oh, no, no, you can't prevent it arriving. No,
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yes, you can't stop it coming in. What else? What other tricks are embedded in here? There's a couple of other things that make it effective.
Self-replicating.
Yes, that is the core of it. It's self-replicating. It says, pass me on. It is an explicit copy me instruction, and that's the core of it. And all these other things are tricks to make you do that. Any more tricks you can think of that make you do that? Yeah?
Yeah, it says pen pal greetings, and so it sort of cohabits with the idea of pen pal greeting you.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, this is part of the altruism trick of wanting to be nice to people, and it sets up that kind of expectation. You could add that there's the status business. It always has IBM or Bill Gates or Microsoft or some powerful thing in there. And there's the urgency. It's just received this morning. Do it quickly before you've got time to think about it. Now, of all those people of you who've had it, how many of you passed it on? One very brave soul's prepared to admit it. Now, I know that you must be lying, some of you, or perhaps forgetting to be more charitable. Because very few people are as brave as you admit you passed it on, because most, you realise afterwards, don't you, that it's stupid. You realise it's stupid because it can't be true. Actually, there is not, certainly when this was made, there could not be such a virus. It doesn't make sense. The virus is this. This itself is the virus. This itself is what clogged up computer systems. Now, in my university, 3 or 4 years after this thing first started, we had a sudden mass of it. And then all the secretaries, who tend to be the ones who are, the academics are too busy doing other things, but the secretaries, it's quite fun to do this. And when they discovered that it was a trick, they sent out messages to all their friends saying, don't believe this, it's a trick, which itself is another virus. And so it goes on. Now, interestingly, what may happen next is that people realise that these are viruses, and so they don't attend to actually serious viruses. And of course, as the technology improves, the viruses like this become possible, the one it's pretending to warn about, become possible, and all sorts of clever things happen, and then we may not be immune when we should be. So watch out. Now, the classic meme virus has, as a gentleman over there said, at its core, a copy me instruction, and then it's backed up with all these other things. I call it a CTAP with it. Copy me instruction backed up by threats and promises. That's a very common structure. That particular one had a whole lot of other things, but the threats and promises are the main thing. Chain letters, email hoaxes, pyramid selling. What else can you think of that has that structure? A copy me instruction backed up with threats and promises.
Self-help groups.
Self-help groups, absolutely, yes. They use that structure, and you feel good when you go out and pass on the message to a whole lot of other people and get them to help themselves as well, and so on. Yes, very similar. What else?
Parents requesting grandchildren?
Parents requesting grandchildren. That's a wonderful one. No, it doesn't have this structure. It is certainly a mimetic thing and a very interesting one. It's also a genetic one. Has he got a problem here? Is he? Has he
He's been a problem for years.
Oh, somebody go and have sex with him and give his parents a few grandchildren, will you? Go on. Anything else? Pardon? It's not going to work. Oh dear. Oh dear. Oh well, never mind. Can't you send your sperm off somewhere or something? Right. What else has this copy me backed up with threats and promises?
Religion?
Right, religions. They are the example that Richard Dawkins went to town on. He calls them viruses of the mind because they have precisely that structure. Now, what he meant by this, in case it's not obvious, let's take the example of Roman Catholicism, because that's the one that he used, but it applies equally well to most, not all, versions of Christianity, to Islam very much so, to some versions of Hinduism, basically the major religions it applies to. At the heart of the religions is a copy me instruction. It works in various different ways. The proselytizing religions are go out and tell all your friends, spread the good news of Jesus or whatever it may be. The traditional Roman Catholic version, it works longitudinally, not horizontally. You are told to go and have lots of grandchildren, have lots of children and lots of grandchildren. You must marry within the faith. You must bring up your children within the faith. They must all learn catechism at a certain age and get christened and get confirmed and go and have their first communion and all of that stuff. Now, in that process, they learn by heart a whole lot of central doctrines. You know, the virgin birth and the fact that Jesus is whatever he is, Son of God, and, you know, all of this kind of stuff. Those are the central means. Now, it's backed up with what's the promises? Heaven. And what's heaven? Everything, whatever your culture thinks is wonderful, floating around on beautiful fluffy clouds, listening to gorgeous music, or in the case of Islam, 72 virgins, if you are a martyr and kill yourself, waiting for you in heaven to do your bidding and be always eager and fresh. I mean, it's in the Quran. No, it's not quite that word, but they are eager, 72 eager virgins, specially designed for you. I don't know whether they sort of magically become virgins again, or when you use up the 72, that's it. But anyway, it is there in the Quran. How long that's supposed to take you in heaven, but it is there. And what about the threats? What's going to happen if you don't? Hell. Even worse than having your whole hard disk wiped out. Or is it? I think I'll settle for toasting forks forever, personally. My hard disk being wiped out would be about the worst thing I can imagine. So that's the basic structure, and of course it has a whole lot of other tricks as well. The altruism trick, beauty trick, a whole mass of tricks. One of the central tricks, I call it a trick, it's a trick from the Jung's point of view, is the way that beautiful things are used to promulgate the means. And you see here the Duomo, a fabulous building. You can't really see, but maybe you've been there, some of you, or seen those pictures, but you know, all of those wonderful carvings of the saints. Inside, fabulous paintings. And what about the music that you hear when you go in a beautiful cathedral or beautiful church? And the wonders of you know, I don't know, Bach's Christmas oratorio or something like this. All these things stir in you genuine aesthetic responses, genuine deep emotions. And because of those, you want to sing. I mean, I sing in the university choir. And I sing, and because most of the choral music in the world was written for religious purposes. So I happily sing about the glories of God and the Haydn's creation and the lions fully formed. God made them fully formed and roaring. And you think, it didn't. They evolved, you prat, you know. But you know, the music is so glorious that I spread the memes anyway. Now, all of these things, you know, suck people into there, have these really deep, genuine experiences that then cause them to go singing about God and saying prayers and saying grace and so on and so on. And using all these mechanisms, these selfish means, infect people and spread throughout the world. Now, the religions have a particularly dodgy capacity in the sense that they are passed on by parents to their children when they're very young. And young children do not have mimetic immunity to these kind of powerful means. So most people in the world are landed with a religion before they are able to produce any defences to it, and not very many throw it off in their lifetime. With the obvious consequences that, you know, in this country I do not have to spell out. Now, the way to think about these religions, the mimetic way to think about these religions, is not to think that anybody ever designed them. Remember that the ferocious predator is not a designer. Remember that natural selection doesn't need a designer. And think about the religions this way. Nowadays, some wicked person might go and invent a cult, and they do, but they're using old means to do it. But the way these world religions have evolved historically, think about how many, you know, charismatic leaders turned up in the Middle East or all over the world 2,000 years ago. Quite a lot of them. But you can imagine one turning up and he just didn't manage to get together the 12 apostles or, you know, whatever it was in the right way, and it fizzled out. There's another one that never got going at all. And there's another one that did pretty well for a bit and died out. and so on and so on. Imagine a whole mass of different cults and different religions starting up at different times, having different time courses because of the tricks they use. And eventually, you'll get one that just has what it takes. It puts together the right threats, the right promises, the right copy me instructions, the right beauty tricks, and takes off. And you may get another one. And you end up with, at, year, however, where we are now, with a few world religions that just happen to have the tricks it takes. And they keep on infecting people, and will keep on infecting people, unless the circumstances change. Well, circumstances are changing, of course, and some of the religions adapt and some don't. And that's the sort of mimetic processes that I'm interested in. But the reason I talk about this is because you must be clear to think of it always being designed by death. It's always the successful means are there because of all the ones that failed. And in the sense of art, if you're thinking about that, if you think about the really successful artworks that are around that everybody knows about and remembers, they are only there by virtue of the fact that all the rest have got forgotten. Because it's the copying process that required all these and took the bits, and the bits that work end up. You need the whole process. You can't only make the successful ones. That's how evolutionary processes work. Now, there are various things. That's basically it for my explanation of memetics, but I want to use it to explain a few things. One of the things I've been particularly interested in is how we humans ended up the way that we are. We are really peculiar species. We have huge brains. We have language. We are the only species on this planet that has language, true language. Not every other species, almost every other species communicates in all kinds of complicated ways. Even bacteria communicate with chemistry, and birds sing to each other, and cats meow, and all sorts of communication. But we are the only species that has true language. And our big brain is really very, very peculiar indeed. If you compare our brain for our body weight with all the other great apes, orangutans, chimpanzees, and so on, then our brains are 3 times bigger than they should be. If you compare us with the rest of the primates, they're 10 times as big. And if you compare the rest of the mammals, well, it's hundreds. They're just huge. And why is that significant? Because big brains are incredibly expensive. They're expensive in at least 3 ways. First of all, they're very dangerous to give birth to. How many mothers do you have here? None at all? Am I the only mother in this place? Well, then I shall just have to tell you from personal experience that giving birth in humans is not a comfortable experience. And if you're lucky, you have gas and air or something to make it bearable. I watched my cat give birth to 4 kittens, and she purred the whole way through. Obviously was delighted at these little kittens popping out, Be lovely with humans. But the point is, the head's too big. And it's as big as it can get in a species that walks upright. Secondly, it's very expensive to build. Every single one of those millions and millions of neurons has to be myelinated with a fatty sheath, and you have to get that fat somewhere. So human milk is the fattiest milk there is to provide all this nourishment, and that means the mother has got to get a huge amount of food, which of course is very difficult in evolutionary terms. And finally, when you're actually been born, you've survived that, you're here, you've got your brain built, it is using, for you sitting here at rest in this lecture theatre, your brain is using 20% of your body's energy output for 2% of your body weight. So it is an extraordinarily expensive thing. Why did evolution go to the trouble of building it? In order to explain this, I need 2 volunteers. Please. Right, up here, please. Not very much space here, but we'll manage. Right, would you like to stand there, please? And would you go there, please? What's your name? Ruth. And what's your name?
Jeremy.
Jeremy and Ruth. Okay. Right, one of them's got to go first. Who is it to be? Ruth or Jeremy? Shout.
Ruth.
That's a pathetic. Only one person shouts, okay? Well, you got it in first, so it's Ruth. Okay, Ruth. When I say go, I want you to entertain everybody for a minute, please. Or 30 seconds. Do anything you like, all right? Jeremy, I want you to watch. All right? Ready, steady, go.
Hi, people. Okay, since I don't have any ideas, I'm just going to believe I'm something else.
since I don't know any.
Well done. Very, very good. Was that a good imitation? Yes? No?
Yes.
Anything wrong with it?
It wasn't as expressive.
All right, it wasn't as
And he couldn't
expressive.
get his arms all the way around.
And he couldn't get his arms all the way around. Okay, what else?
He didn't undo more of the cabling.
He didn't have to do more of the thing. Oh my God. I don't know what we'll wait a minute till we finish this and then you can plug it back in. Okay, he didn't undo the cabling because it was already undone, yes. Anything else?
He didn't actually support himself on his hands.
He didn't support himself on his hands, yes. Anything else?
Kind of followed out of it.
He kind of what?
Popped out of it. He didn't stay with it.
Yeah, he didn't do that sort of finishing off end bit. Okay, but was it an imitation?
Yeah.
Yes, you've got no hesitation, have you? In fact, to begin with, you said it was a very good imitation, and I think it was pretty good in the circumstances, frankly. So, two things here. It wasn't perfect, but it was an imitation. Now, why am I saying this? Because I want you to think about how difficult imitation is. You see, we are almost the only species that can imitate. You may think this is odd, but it's true. Some birds can imitate song. One particular species of parrot can imitate some actions. Whales and dolphins, some of them, can imitate sounds extremely well. They may even have a mimetic culture going on at the sea that we don't know about. But that's it. Even chimpanzees probably can't imitate, although some people think they can a bit. But if they can a bit, it's only a bit. Cats, dogs, you name it, rats, spiders, they cannot imitate, only we can. Now, why? It's actually very difficult. Let's suppose, are any of you into sort of robots and that kind of stuff? No? Well, imagine, yeah, you are, okay. Imagine that you're a robot engineer. Now, can you just stand forward there a minute, Ruth? Imagine that I'm building a robot that's got to do the job that Jeremy did, okay? Now, what's this robot got to do? First of all, it's got to have a vision system. Well, one thing we've learned over at MIT predominantly, most of it's gone on, Martin Minsky apparently said to his, in 1966, set a graduate student the task of solving computer vision in the summer holidays. 40 years later, computer vision is really, really primitive. Seeing is incredibly difficult. So it's got to be able to see. It's got to watch the thing, and it's got to store what it sees of those actions, because it's going to do delayed imitation. It's got to wait till it's finished before it does it, right? Now, having stored it, it's then got to transform all these actions and the speech and everything else. It's got hearing as well, but, It's got to transform all that and into movements of its own arms and legs that are going to look from over there to be the same as that. Right? Now do you see why it's so difficult? No wonder it took evolution 4.5 billion years to come up with it. So, thank you very much for your demonstration. Now, the point of explaining all that is this. At some point in our far past, our ancestors became capable of imitation. Thank you. What happened then? They started to copy things. Now, in the beginning, I imagine they copied useful things like lighting fires. But that's very important, because if you can light the fire and somebody else can't, the one with the fire is going to get more food, and its infants are going to survive better, and it's going to genetically do better. Also, if you can copy that skill, you're going to do better. So being able to copy the people who've got the good memes becomes at a premium. So genes for being able to copy are going to spread in the gene pool. Now, I've just showed you how difficult imitation is. It requires a lot of brain power, requires more neurons. So if you've got a bigger brain, you're more likely to be able to do it. And so this makes pressure for bigger brains. Then what happens is, once people can start imitating useful things like lighting fires, they're not automatically going to know which things are useful. They're going to start copying useless things, like putting feathers in their hats, like that person down there. And they're going to start doing things like, oh, you nearly knocked my computer off the table as well. Now that would have been nearly as bad as having my whole hard disk destroyed. They're going to start doing religious rituals, rain dances that don't really work but look very impressive and might occasionally appear to work, painting their bodies and having, all sorts of creations. And if the same, I call this mimetic drive, if the same thing applies, that is, it pays to copy the people with the best means, they're going to be the ones who get the best mates, have the most children, and pass on the genes for helping to copy whatever it was that the successful memes were. So this is going to drive, two things are going to happen. Memes are going to spread more and more and more, and you're going to get more and more interesting things being copied. In other words, culture starts to evolve. And secondly, the way that culture goes is going to affect the brains that people have. So this, if you think of it in religions, then that's going to be why we have such religious brains and why we're so susceptible to these memes. But think about art. We are the only species on the planet that has true art as well as true language. In other words, what I mean by that is there are plenty of species who make beautiful things. Bowerbirds build these wonderful bowers, but they don't copy it. They don't have a culture of art. They don't have the evolution of art. They don't copy images and objects and structures and sounds from one to the other. But we do, and we love it. And my argument here is that because the art started spreading, the brains were forced to follow. And eventually it led to what's much more recognizable in early cave art and so on. And you can imagine that the people who do this were copied more than the people who couldn't. And so everybody started to get art-loving, music-loving brains. And if you read any book, like Steve Pinker's book on evolutionary psychology, the evolutionary psychologist will say things like, well, from an evolutionary point of view, art and music are useless. Well, quite so, they are from the genes' point of view. But from the memes' point of view, of course they're useful. That's what spreads memes. Our artistic brains, our music-loving brains are what spreads memes. So, we have a general principle here, which I hope you can understand, because it has some very interesting implications. I'm going to stop quite soon in case you've had enough. This is the principle of the co-evolution between the replicator and the replicating machinery. So you can imagine in the very beginning, if any of you are interested in this kind of Maynard Smith and things like this about how the early replicators got going, there would have been things before the genes. But once genes came along, once DNA replication came along, the genes and the cellular machinery inside the bodies that copies the genes have to co-evolve together. Because genes aren't genes without the machinery that copies them. Then you get memes coming along, and as I've explained, memes and genes together, by the process I've called mimetic drive, create our human brains with huge brains, with language, with art, with music, and so on. Now, what happens after you've got language? If you think about what makes a good replicator, replicators have to be long-lived, make lots of copies, and make high-fidelity copies. That's what makes a good replicator. Now, language is a very good replicator. You can talk to lots of people, but it doesn't last. So what's going to come next?
Writing.
Yes, writing. Huge step forward. Because every time before writing was around, anything anybody said was gone. So you have huge oral traditions where people learn stuff by heart. But that can decay and degenerate. Once you've got writing, you can keep it fixed. And then what?
Printing.
Printing, absolutely. So you get printing, which makes, you see, fidelity, fecundity, and longevity are the prime things. Writing will give you more longevity, but one copy at a time is terrible. I think all those monks laboriously copying out the same thing again and again, one copy at a time. Once you've got printing, you can make lots of copies. So the writing, the machinery, printing presses, and I mean nowadays huge publishing houses and so on, co-evolves with the books that are being written. And then what?
Computers, digital.
Absolutely, because we've got someone who's got some brains in here, isn't it? Not only that, I mean, that is what I'm thinking, but also roads and railways and trains and planes, all these things that carry memes around, all these things are co-evolving along with the memes that they're copying. So if you see some amazing story that's written down, that will encourage you to buy the book, which encourages the printing presses to be built more and so on and so on. The things co-evolve together. And then we get the internet, which of course has transformed everything. Sometimes I just can't believe that 10 years ago I'd never heard of it. The World Wide Web is 11 years old. That's not very long. It's incredible. And now I couldn't live my life the way I do without it. It's that, it's utterly essential to my life. And probably to many of yours as well. Well, what next? I mean, this is not the place to spend a long time speculating about it. But I'll just give you a kind of flavour of some of the work that I'm doing and the ideas that I've been thinking about in terms of the fact that what we really have here up and running is a mimetic process that is not under our control, because evolutionary processes never are under our control. And the memes are out there propagating themselves in this amazing system which we think we've made for ourselves. But actually, the memes made us do it. At least that's the way I look at it. And what's going to happen? You know, they're going to be the ones going to the moon, not us, not these heavy, swishy, you know, hard, expensive bodies to take. They're going to be the ones ruling the world in the sense of filling up all the capacity. We're already getting to the point where there's stuff out there in the internet that nobody sees, but it replicates. And you have, you know, trawlers going around copying stuff and finding out information completely out of human control. Now, we also have virtual personalities beginning out there. You can have chat rooms where you don't know which ones are virtual and which are real. And put these things together, and you're going to have actual kind of, I would say ultimately, conscious entities just out there virtually in the internet, running about, doing things, influencing you, popping and saying, hi, hello, I'm a little virus, and I've come to annoy you, and I'm not going to do any work today. Every time you try and do anything, I'm going to, you know, and so on. And any kind of number of things. But the point is, thinking of it as an evolutionary process gives you a very different view on our role in it. I'll just give you a couple of examples of just how far things have changed. I noticed this, I picked this newspaper up on at Paddington Station in London a little while ago. Giotto's frescoes have just been reopened and cleaned up. Think about how few people saw those frescoes when they were painted. I mean, yes, they would have had a much greater effect, enormous, profound emotional effect on those few people, but very few people would have seen them in 1300 or whenever they were originally painted. Now, this is a daily newspaper. On Paddington Station, there was a stack this high in the newsagent, and there were lots on the train that people had thrown away. And I threw. After I'd copied this, I put it away myself. You know, what would have been so valuable a little while ago. Now, the point here is that not only is it so easy, but that is competing with every other image. And that news, I saw the New York Times today. You know, it's this thick. And there's all that competition to be got into these things, and competition for somebody to turn to that page and look at it, because most of the pages are not even looked at. And I'll just tell you another little story about how memes get themselves around in the oddest way today because of the technology we have and because of this society. BBC recently launched a new channel called BBC 4, right? Now, this is arguably the best broadcasting company in the entire world. It's starting up a new television channel, so, you know, this is a big deal. And it has a little logo, which will spread, I suppose, a bit. I don't see why it should, it's very boring, but never mind. And it has a little motto, everybody needs a place to think, BBC 4, right? Now, I was invited to, my partner and I were invited to the launch party of BBC 4. Big, fantastic party in London, where all the important people are going to be there, etc. And this is the front of the invitation, okay? And we opened the invitation, and it came in an envelope with a sort of screwed up kind of a cloth thing, about this big, with sort of scribble on it, you know? And we thought, what is this scribble? You know, this is yucky scribble. Appears to be some sort of a dog in the corner, can you see it? And really horrible writing. You know, it's not kids' writing, which might be quite endearing, it's just horrible writing. And it says, well, what does it say? So we spread it out. See that? Is this a lighting chap up there? Can you make it more visible by turning the lights down or something? Can you see it? Yeah. Make anything of it? What is it? Why are you laughing? Hmm? Well, if you can make it out, eventually we worked out that it says BBC 4, everybody needs a place to think, and there's a dog holding a bone lying between the legs of a naked woman, right? And we thought, oh, yeah, that's horrible writing, and it's horribly and nasty, and beastly, and not very nice at all. But down here we suddenly saw the signature. Tracy Emin? Woo! We've got a Tracy Emin cloth! Woo! Oh, God, you're so ignorant, aren't you? You don't know about Tracy Emin. Heard about Tracy Emin's bed? Yeah. Of course you have. She's the one who put her unmade bed in the Turner Prize, full of used condoms and used tampons and stuff, and really disgusting, right? Tracy Emin is really disgusting, basically, and this is her really disgusting thing. Now, here I am showing you this because I thought it was so horrible, and I thought it was it's a very successful meme. And her disgusting bed was a very successful meme. Why? Well, I hope that through this lecture you can get some idea of the range of reasons why memes succeed. They succeed for all kinds of reasons. And as they do, they affect us in all different ways. This is just one trivial little example that affected me in a rather odd way, and so I've passed it on. You can think of this whole vast system with the internet and so on, rather in this way. I mean, look at that picture. This is a very familiar sight in today's world, isn't it? Who's the slaves and who's the masters there? Well, I don't really need to answer, do I? I don't know about you. You probably have much more artistic life than me. But I spend most of my life sitting at a desk, typing out memes, bring, hello, yes, hang on, the fax coming in, more email, doing another email, I think I'm the slave in the means of driving. And all this stuff. At least that's a way of thinking about it. Perhaps it's better to think of it as both one and the other. But essentially, the way I want you to be able to see it is as an evolutionary process in which the memes will spread, if they can, for whatever reason they can. And so, I would conclude with this thought, that the creative force behind all art, or indeed all culture, is the evolutionary algorithm. That simple process that I explained with these little animals. It's the very same process. It's doing this. And we humans are the meme machines. And I'll just leave you with a question to ask yourself. When you create any kind of art, it is a selfish meme that will succeed if it can. But you might whether you care why it succeeds.